Hey children, it's Friday, May 21st, and I woke up about 30 minutes ago. I had a dream with the two individuals in the following clip. I was at their house, at Lex's house in Austin, Texas. Yeah, I tried to just convince them of climate change, and I'm going to play two following clips from their most recent podcast. And why that's important is because I think it's the first time that I've seen them or any guests talk about climate change on his podcast. Normally, I really enjoy his podcast most of the time. Lex both of them are tremendously smart people. And I know Sam is kind of monotone. What is he? He's a Gen Xer. He's 54. I'm sure if I met him in real life, I would be just overtaken with his intelligence. But Sam, in case you don't know, is a author, neuroscientist, podcast host. He's facilitated those meditation apps you can see advertised all the time on the App Store. And Lex Fridman is an AI researcher and scientist. So great combination of worlds there. But on the first clip, Sam elaborates on the same feeling I have had over the past year on how essentially we've completely fucked up the COVID response. Like, if this is how we're going to react to a benign, it's not, it's fatal, flu, if this is how we reacted globally, to that, like, we are completely hopeless when it comes to climate change. And it's great to see someone of competence and high intelligence, in my opinion, agree. It's just nice that I'm not alone in that regard. And then the second clip is the meaning of life, which is a dumb question because it could be anything. But really, I know it when I agree with him is in the place of enhanced or like a meditative place. You feel connectedness in the moment. And I've felt this once or twice before in my life, and I've been dying to go back and relive that moment. Jim Carrey's talked about it as well. It's been a transformation to him, is when you get in this place of meditative, just a mindset where you're fully engaged with everything in the present moment. And our culture and everything in our life is told about progress and, oh, it's Friday, so I need to get that next thing or get to here and to be happy. And that's all a load of bullshit. Like, everything you have and need, as long as you have food and shelter, really, and your basic needs met and friends and family, is what you need, and you can be good. That's the best you've ever had on this little sliver of a billion years that we've been on this planet. So anyways, I'll shut up, but I think it was really fascinating to hear this, and just a reminder to live in the present moment. Enjoy.
You've produced a special episode with Rob Reed on your podcast recently on how bioengineering of viruses is going to destroy human civilization. So,
or could. One fears, yeah.
Sorry, the confidence there.
Yeah.
But in the 21st century, what do you think, especially after having thought through that angle, what do you think is the biggest threat to the survival of the human species? I can give you the full menu if you'd like.
Yeah, well, no, I would put the biggest threat at another level out. Kind of the meta threat is our inability to agree about what the threats actually are, and to converge on strategies for responding to them. Right. So, like, I view COVID as, among other things, a truly terrifyingly failed dress rehearsal for something far worse, right? COVID is just about as benign as it could have been, and still have been worse than the flu when you're talking about a global pandemic, right? It's going to kill a few million people, or it looks like it's killed about 3 million people. Maybe it'll kill a few million more unless something gets away from us with a variant that's much worse, or we really don't play our cards right. But the general shape of it is, it's got somewhere around 1% lethality, and whatever side of that number it really is on in the end, it's not what would in fact be possible and is in fact probably inevitable something with orders of magnitude more lethality than that. And it's just so obvious we are totally unprepared, right? We are running this epidemiological experiment of linking the entire world together, and then also now, per the podcast that Rob Reed did, democratizing the tech that will allow us to do this, to engineer pandemics, right? And so more and more people will be able to engineer synthetic viruses that will be, by the sheer fact that they would have been engineered with malicious intent, worse than COVID. And we're still living in to speak specifically about the United States, we have a country here where we can't even agree that this is a thing. Like that COVID, I mean, there's still people who think that this is basically a hoax designed to control people. And I mean, it's stranger still, there are people who will acknowledge that COVID is real, and they don't think the deaths have been faked or misascribed. But they think that they're far happier at the prospect of catching COVID than they are of getting vaccinated for COVID, right? They're not worried about COVID. They're worried about vaccines for COVID, right? Mm-hmm. And the fact that we just can't converge in a conversation that we've now had a year to have with one another on just what is the ground truth here? What's happened? Why has it happened? How safe is it to get COVID at in every cohort in the population? And how safe are the vaccines? And the fact that there's still an air of mystery around all of this for much of our society does not bode well when you're talking about solving any other problem that may yet kill us.
But do you think convergence grows with the magnitude of the threat? So
it's possible, except I feel like we have tipped into, because when the threat of COVID looked the most dire, right? When we were seeing reports from Italy that looked like the beginning of a zombie movie, right?
Because it could have been much, much worse.
Yeah, like this is lethal, right? Like your ICUs are going to fill up in like you're 14 days behind us. Your medical system is in danger of collapse. Lock the fuck down. We have people refusing to do anything sane in the face of that. Like, and people fundamentally thinking it's not going to get here, right? Like, or that's who knows what's going on in Italy, but it has no implications for what's going to go on in New York in a mere 6 days, right? And now it kicks off in New York, and you got people in the middle of the country thinking it's no factor. It's not. That's just big city. Those are big city problems. Or they're faking it, or I mean, it just the layer of politics has become so dysfunctional for us that even in the presence of a pandemic that looked legitimately scary there in the beginning. I mean, it's not to say that it hasn't been devastating for everyone who's been directly affected by it, and it's not to say it can't get worse. But here, for a very long time, we have known that we're in a situation that is more benign than what seemed like the worst case scenario as it was kicking off, especially in Italy, and so still, yeah, it's quite possible that if we saw the asteroid hurtling toward Earth, and everyone agreed that it's gonna make impact and we're all gonna die, then we could get off Twitter and actually build the rockets that are going to divert the asteroid from its Earth crossing path, and we could do something pretty heroic. But when you talk about anything else that isn't that's slower moving than that, I mean, something like climate change. I think the prospect of our converging on a solution to climate change purely based on political persuasion is non-existent at this point. I just think that, to bring Elon back into this, the way to deal with climate change is to create technology that everyone wants, that is better than all the carbon producing technology, and then we just transition because you want an electric car the same way you wanted a smartphone or you want anything else, and you're working totally with the grain of people's selfishness and short-term thinking. The idea that we're going to convince the better part of humanity that climate change is an emergency that they have to make sacrifices to respond to, given what's happened around COVID, I just think that's the fantasy of a fantasy.
Let me ask you the last question.
Uh,
Without any serving it up, without any explanation, what is the meaning of life?
I think it's either the wrong question or that question is answered by paying sufficient attention to any present moment such that there's no basis upon which to pose that question. It's not answered in the usual way. It's not a matter of having more information. It's having more engagement with reality as it is in the present moment, or consciousness as it is in the present moment. You don't ask that question when you're most captivated by the most important thing you ever pay attention to. That question only gets asked when you're abstracted away from that experience, that peak experience, and you're left wondering, why are so many of my other experiences mediocre, right? Like, why am I repeating the same pleasures every day? Why is my Netflix queue just like, when's this going to run out? Like, I've seen so many shows like this. Am I really going to watch another one? Like, all of that's a moment where you're not actually having the beatific vision, right? You're not sunk into the present moment, and you're not truly in love. Like, you're in a relationship with somebody who conceptually you love, right? This is the person you're living your life with, but you don't actually feel good together, right? Like, so like it's in those moments of where attention hasn't found a good enough reason to truly sink into the present, so as to obviate any concern like that, right? And I mean, that's why meditation is this kind of superpower, because until you learn to meditate, you think the outside world or the circumstances of your life always have to get arranged so that the present moment can become good enough to demand your attention in a way that seems fulfilling, that makes you happy. And so if it's jujitsu, you think, okay, I got to get back on the mat. It's been months since I've trained. It's been over a year since I've trained. It's COVID. When am I going to be able to train again? That's the only place I feel great, right? Or, I've got a ton of work to do. I'm not going to be able to feel good until I get all this work done, right? So I've got some deadline that's coming. You always think that your life has to change, the world has to change, so that you can finally have a good enough excuse to truly to just be here, and here is enough. Where the present moment becomes totally captivating. Meditation is meditation is another name for the discovery that you can actually just train yourself to do that on demand. So that just looking at a cup can be good enough in precisely that way, and any sense that it might not be is recognized to be a thought that is mysteriously unravels the moment you notice it, and you fall, and the moment expands and becomes more diaphanous, and then there's no evidence that this isn't the best moment of your life, right? Like this, it doesn't, and again, it doesn't have to be pulling all the reins and levers of pleasure. It's not like, this tastes like chocolate. This is the most chocolatey moment of my life. No, it's just the sense data don't have to change, but the sense that there is some kind of basis for doubt about the rightness of being in the world in this moment, that can evaporate when you pay attention. And that is the meaning. So the kind of the meta answer to that question, the meaning of life for me is to live in that mode more and more, and to, whenever I notice I'm not in that mode, to recognize it and return, and to not be to cease more and more to take the reasons why not at face value, because we all have reasons why we can't be fulfilled in this moment. It's like this. I've got all these outstanding things that I'm worried about, right? It's like there's that thing that's happening later today that I'm anxious about. Whatever it is, we're constantly deferring our sense of this is it. This is not a dress rehearsal. This is the show. We keep deferring it, and we just have these moments on the calendar where we think, okay, this is where it's all going to land. Is that vacation I planned with my 5 best friends? We do this once every 3 years, and now we're going, and here we are on the beach together. Unless you have a mind that can really pay attention, really cut through the chatter, really sink into the present moment, you can't even enjoy those moments the way they should be enjoyed, the way you dreamed you would enjoy them when they arrive. So meditation in this sense is the great equalizer. It's like you don't have to live with the illusion anymore that you need a good enough reason, and that things are going to get better when you do have those good reasons. It's like there's just a mirage-like quality to every future attainment and every future breakthrough and every future peak experience, that eventually you get the lesson that you never quite arrive, right? Like you don't arrive until you cease to step over the present moment in search of the next thing. I mean, we're stepping over the thing that we think we're seeking, in the act of seeking it. And so it is kind of a paradox. I mean, there's this paradox which, I mean, it sounds trite, but it's like you can't actually become happy. You can only be happy. And it's the illusion that it's the illusion that your future being happy can be predicated on this act of becoming in any domain, and becoming includes this sort of, further scientific understanding on the questions that interest you, or, getting in better shape, or whatever the thing is, whatever the contingency of your dissatisfaction seems to be in any present moment. Real attention solves the koan, in a way that becomes a very different place from which to then make any further change. It's not that you just have to dissolve into a puddle of goo. I mean, you can still get in shape, and you can still do all the things that, the superficial things that are obviously good to do, but the sense that your well-being is over there is really does diminish, and eventually just becomes a kind of non sequitur. So